Everyone. Karen, I'd like to begin actually with a short anecdote from my childhood. I spent a long time in a so-called exam-oriented education, just like Ryan mentioned, at a private elementary school, which was famous for its hellishly rigorous system. But the parents loved to send their kids here because, well, to produce good middle school application results. But they didn't really know what happened here, which was that my teacher would beat the students low scores. I remember that one of my classmates was slapped in the face. The loud slap sent the small boy's face twitching, skinny body tumbling over the desk like a dried leaf in the wind. He talked to me later and said he didn't understand. He thought it was because he didn't have good enough grades. So he tried and tried, but his scores didn't get better, and his mental health condition got worse as the beating continued. I was given to understand that he had to receive psychological treatment afterwards and never made it to middle school. There are too many things wrong with this that it's very hard to even begin, but it did get me thinking. The school placed the pressure on the teacher and transferred it to the students in the form of violence. But she was not a single case. Teachers like this were no longer educators. They're workers on an assembly line. Take the children, dismantle them, take away what makes them children, and stuff in what they need to produce test scores, all without giving a damn about what they'll end up doing for the rest of their lives. This is not education. This is mass production. If you really think about the high-pressure, exam-oriented education, it's essentially a form of manufactured terror. This system takes certain knowledge sets, makes them the scope of the exam, and uses it to drive the students like sheep onto the same path. Whoever deviates is devaluated because, well, that's how we assess an individual within this framework. Results determine personal worth. So what's wrong with this way of doing things? Well, obviously, depression and suicide comes to mind, as shown in this picture. 1 in 4 adolescents have suffered from mild or severe depression syndromes. The suicide rate also quadrupled in our country in over a decade. As for the others, I once heard a sharp assertion that our education, at its core, is fostering an escape. Escaping distinct personalities and going with the tide, escaping innovation and relying on fixed paradigms, escaping adventure and staying within their comfort zone, escaping their unique selves and fleeing from an average other. Let's set these aside for a short while and ask ourselves, with this amount of sacrifice, is the system serving its purpose? Right? Is it selecting capable individuals? Is it giving the lower income families a fair shot? Well, I believe the answer lies in this slide. In this graph, for those of you who don't know this line, is called the Great Gatsby line. And the Gini coefficient here measures inequality, while the intergenerational earnings elasticity here measures the impact of parents' income on the next generation. So in simpler words, the higher this value is, the lower social mobility we have. And a 0.6 value of China over here means that the mobility is very limited. The result fits our expectation in a way. We're not making it fairer for everyone. We're just making it equally unfair for everyone so that it really does look fair at first sight. 2023 survey of Chinese undergraduate students from over 400 universities yielded this result, that 73% expressed confusion regarding direction for the rest of their lives. We are mass-producing hollow individuals because how is a person numbed by the institutional education they received to talk the idealistic talk of passions and life goals when all they have is self-intimidation akin to a death threat? Well, it's all because the educational problem at its core is a distributional problem. It's actually a very simple idea if you think about it. When we have too many people, we can't ensure everyone has enough resources. And therefore, we need a method of selection so we can distribute our limited resources into the hands of the. Now we've created a clear goal for everyone to be one of the selected few. But inciting intense competition does not make scarce resource any less scarce. It just makes it less accessible for everyone. We're also ignoring one fact. The value of a talent, which in this case means a person of ability who's competitive in a job market. The value of a talent lies in scarcity. Does higher education create scarcity? Maybe 20 years ago, because it created skills that create scarcity, right? But now, even as it becomes more and more common, more and more people are drawing a line between grad and undergrad degrees with money and social position. After working toward the one goal for years, they graduate and find out, 1, the substitutability of a talent has skyrocketed, and 2, industries are increasingly saturated, and 3, the bulk of what they learn will not be applied in their real life anytime soon. Job market becomes a complete shit show that's more about the one diploma than about what people learn on their way to earn it. Well, of course, it's natural to feel lost. Now let's look at the selection system in the United States, quality-oriented education. A very recent example comes to mind, and Ryan also mentioned this, because both the other two speakers and myself have just experienced the America College application system. Well, just as Ryan introduced, the famous holistic review combines academic requirement of standardized test scores and an emphasis on extracurricular activities and recommendation. That sounds pretty fair, right? But is it? Let's ask ourselves. Perhaps the data here will explain better. This, by the way, is a study conducted last year by Opportunity Insights. All of the following data are collected from Ivy League students. Richest 1% make up 1 in 6 Ivy League kids. How did this happen? There are two ways. One is legacy admission. The other is athlete recruitment. We'll look at those one by one briefly. As you can see, in the top 1%, the likelihood of admission rocketed to 7 times. These people are privileged, even among the privileged. And the same thing goes with athletic recruitment. They're several times more likely to come from higher income families. Here, we have a final graph for students' test scores. In other words, they passed first exam-based screening. This shows their performance in other subjective fields. While there's no great fluctuation in academic ratings, the richest 1% has excessive advantages in all 3 other areas. You might ask, well, why are we talking only about the Ivy Leagues? Well, that's like less than 1% of the US college population. Well, from this 1% emerged 12% Fortune 500 CEOs, a quarter of United States senators, and 13% of top 0.1% earners. These schools, by data, are incubators of future leaders and shapers, and there's no denying it. But the holistic review is yet another thinly veiled way to keep money and power in the hands of the rich while using a few lower income cases to pacify the less privileged. At this point, the gist of all these is pretty clear. Education was never a fair game. It wasn't meant to be one. It's rigged as hell. Whether in exam-oriented education or quality-oriented education, wealthy are always favored. They're always the center of resources. And fairness was never a valid benchmark. So what is education? Here is a simple answer of what education is not. But I'm going to pause here for a while for you to come up with a brief answer in your mind. But I'm going to pause here for a while for you to come up with a brief answer in your mind. My answer is, it's anything. In times of peace, it's a means to provide cultural enrichment. In times of conflict, it's a means to instill patriotic values. In affluent societies, it's a golden ticket that promises continued wealth. In an impoverished society, a path to basic economic survival. Under democratic regimes, it's a tool to help one fulfill desirable potential, but under authoritarian regimes, it's a tool for enforcing conformity. This brings me to my conclusion. In the age of uncertainties, as the educated kid, I believe we must be ready to extract from our education the great sense of self-recognition, no matter which educational system. It's essentially the awareness that education is intrinsically lopsided. That we'll always be more privileged than some, and there will always be those more privileged than us. It's also a struggle against meritocracy, an idea deeply embedded in any system. It's the idea that opportunities are distributed according to personal performance. In other words, it tells the elites that they are where they are because of their own efforts. And by doing so, it also tells the lower achievers that their failure was because they didn't work hard enough. But that's not the case. Meritocracy is based on the premise that opportunities are equally accessible and readily available to all. This premise no longer holds true, as it probably never has. And I hope that this self-recognition can call for our awareness that none of us is at where we are because of our own efforts. We are where we are because of a combination of family investments, being born in a metropolis, tremendous amount of luck, and yes, maybe a teeny tiny bit of our own efforts. And with this recognition should come empathy, humility, and meaningful goals along with meaningful relationships, and these are the things that we can and should make of our education. Finally, I'll end this speech with one of my favorite quotes from Thoreau, which I encourage everyone to understand better. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, confront only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived.